This time on the Brothers Mysterium.
Let me ask you something. I said, can you see them?
But if you are not a believer and it's not true, then it begs the moral question, which is, how sinister are these people really?
The question of if somebody commits suicide, do they go to the afterworld? Is there some type of punishment?
Are you afraid of death? Are you not? Does heaven exist? Does hell? What are your personal beliefs? Part 3 of our discussion on mediums starts now. My brother and I have always been intrigued by the unexplainable. Like many, we're fascinated with stories of the supernatural, fringe science, and modern-day mysteries.
Though we've seen no first-hand proof of its existence, our minds remain open to the possibility.
Unsatisfied with the so-called evidence on television and the internet, we are choosing to take matters into our own hands and conduct our own interviews and research.
Now we're on a quest to speak with as many people as we can and hear the stories of these events from those who have lived them.
No Hollywood effects or exaggerations, and no hidden agenda. We invite you to listen and decide what and who you believe.
We are the Brothers Mysterium.
Hello, and thank you for listening once again to the Brothers Mysterium. This is Tommy, along with my brother Eric.
Heyo.
And I want to let everybody out there know, we have remembered and committed to memory our secret phrase for if one of us dies, we can do the Houdini test. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back, listen to episode 2, which is the first installment of this trilogy of interviews with Bert, which we're about to jump into momentarily.
I wouldn't say we haven't committed to memory, seeing as how we just remembered it like 3 minutes ago before starting to record this episode. So by the time this episode is done, it may have been forgotten once more.
That's fair to say, but the listeners never would have known that if you didn't admit it.
Yeah. No, I think I got it.
Yeah, we'll see. But just a quick recap. Bert has now spoken to a medium on the phone several times, then went to 2 group readings with another different medium. And unfortunately, at this time in his life, his grandfather now, who basically helped raise him, sort of a surrogate father on his grandmother's side, passed away.
Well, this is his grandfather, Jerry, on his mother's side.
That is correct.
Yeah, so just to recap again, and for those of you who've been listening since the beginning, I apologize, but you might need a refresher. So Anthony is his father, passed away in 1993. Jerry was his grandfather on his mother's side, and Joseph is his great-grandfather on his mother's side. Jerry, who had a hand in raising him after his father had passed away, has at this point now also passed away.
And as you mentioned, Joseph, Bert's great-grandfather, had come through in several readings, talking to Bert, as well as like having some messages sort of to pass on to Jerry, who was his son, Bert's grandfather. So now we're going to pick it up where Bert reaches out to the phone medium that he uses. And this time it's not so much to get in touch with his father as it is to reach out to his recently passed away grandfather, Jerry.
The Brothers Mysterium.
This past October of 2014, I got a psychic reading from the lady from the first phone call, Cindy Lane Newcomb. What spurred that is my grandfather passed in August. So around August 18th, about 3 weeks later, I tried to get a hold of her. And it took a very, very long time because this woman is actually in the midst of moving from one office in some weird town in New York State to another. So I finally got a hold of her and I set up an appointment, set up a reading for October. And the call was for 10 o'clock in the morning. I had been pacing around like you wouldn't believe, very nervous about this whole thing. And so she gets to the phone and she goes, you're like a hamster over there. And what she picked up on was the fact that I was pacing.
Right.
I said, yeah. I said, you can imagine. She goes, okay. She goes, all right. She goes, are you at your like grandmother's house or something? And I said, I am. And she goes, okay. She goes, all right. She goes, your grandmother is like kind of not cognitive at the moment. Like kind of goes in and out of things. And I said, yeah, mentally, I think she's senile. And she goes, right. Okay. She goes, I get that. She goes, okay. She goes, now, I have your father coming through And then she goes, but then she goes, did you, and she backs up. She goes, did you just have somebody pass?
So she was unaware of your grandfather's passing.
I had not told her.
Is what spurred on this.
Right.
Okay.
So I had not said that to her ahead of time.
After sensing that someone close to Bert has just passed away, Cindy Lane Newcomb has a difficult time identifying this recently deceased person. The reason for this?
They're both coming to me as like your dad. She was like, I have the one male figure saying I'm his father. She goes, I have another figure saying I'm his father. And she goes, who? She goes, wait, this is the father-in-law of your father. And I go, okay. I said, yeah. I said, this is my grandfather. I said, it's my mom's dad. She goes, okay. She goes, they're both coming to me as your father. And I said, well, that's because I said, as you were aware from the previous time, my father passed, my grandfather became like a surrogate father. And she goes, okay. And she goes, I think what that's to me, she goes, it's your grandfather expressing his love and the level of relationship between him and you to me, and invariably you. And I said, that's right. And I said, that makes sense. And she goes, okay, I need your help in differentiating who they are and which one is saying what. And I said, let me ask you something. And this is where I try to do some digging. And I said, let me ask you something. I said, can you see them? And like I said, can you see? She goes, she cuts me off and she goes, I don't see them. She goes, but what I hear are thoughts in my head. And right now I have 4 people. She goes, I have your father, your grandfather, another person, and another person. And they're all speaking to me at once. And she goes, they're all speaking to me at once. And they're all coming through and saying different things. And I have to sort out what they're saying. She goes, but I cannot see them and I cannot hear their voice. I wouldn't be able to differentiate their voices. I would just be able to differentiate the thoughts one way or another. So it's kind of like you're thinking to yourself. You don't hear a voice in your head when you think, oh, I forgot to take out the garbage.
Right.
You hear just a thought, and that's what it is.
Props to you for, I've always wondered that myself as to how exactly it worked.
Yeah, I had to dig a little.
So in that instance, that's how she operates,
right.
That's good. I'm glad you asked that because that's something I've been curious about.
So she says to me, she goes, okay, so she goes, I feel like he passed away. She goes, no, this is your grandfather. I said, that's my grandfather. And she goes, okay, so I feel like he passed away somewhere like over the summer. And I said, he did. And she goes, but you don't really know how. And she goes, did he like kind of just stop? She says, is that the best way to describe it? He just stopped. And I go, that's exactly it. I said, we don't know what happened. I said, he just kind of like woke up. And I said, he mentioned something to my grandmother. And then like about 2 hours later, he was gone. All right. She goes, he died of an aneurysm. And she, interestingly enough, described it as head trauma.
Bert links the thought of his grandfather dying from an aneurysm to Cindy's suggestion of head trauma, by considering that when a person experiences an aneurysm, the walls of their weakened arteries begin to balloon out and sometimes burst. This arterial bursting leads to internal bleeding, which means there isn't enough blood getting to the brain. Hence the brain, or head, experiences something traumatic. Now, this left us asking, is relating the phrase head trauma to an aneurysm just a loose attempt to connect the dots? Or is this a good example of how difficult it could be for a medium to have to translate the often enigmatic and cryptic feelings they receive from the other side into words?
We had actually thought that, me and my family, we had thought that it was an aneurysm beforehand, a blood clot, because my grandfather had a heart condition and a pacemaker and a monitor next to his bed that was monitoring the pacemaker. And that would have gone off. That did not go off. And also, he was a smart guy. If he was in some type of duress, it would have been a sign of a struggle. He would have thrown a lamp if he couldn't speak, reach for the phone, right. Nothing like that. So she goes, yeah, he died of an aneurysm.
After giving Bert some insight into his grandfather's passing, Cindy mentions Joseph, Bert's great-grandfather.
She goes, he's with him. Your grandfather's with his father. And your grandfather says that he passed away. He woke up, went to sleep, and then woke up in heaven.
Right.
And it was his father who came to get him and help it. And I said, okay. I go, that makes a level of sense. So she goes, did you speak at his funeral? And I said, I did. She goes, okay, your grandfather wants me to tell you that it was very heartfelt and thank you for reading. Now, I'm telling you, that is definitely something a skeptic would claw all over.
Right.
They would go, of course, you're the grandson. You spoke at a funeral.
Right.
Heartfelt, of course. No, it wasn't heartfelt. Now, to me, because I was there, I was the one who read, and it was heartfelt. And I know that's something that my grandfather would say and acknowledge. I don't view that as something that she was just able to pick out of a hat just for the sake of wowing me.
Even though this call was shorter than his first session with Cindy Lane Newcomb, the amount of information Bert received this time around made the reading feel much longer.
She says, okay, I feel like there's some lack of clarity in the will. Your grandfather says there's a lot of people there. He estimates about 200 or 300. She goes, is that like a mess? Is that like a weird mess? And I said, that is a weird mess. Your grandfather wants me to tell Jim that he appreciates what he did. Grandfather's telling me that your mom is owed that money, that there's nothing to discuss. Was he dressed in an unordinary way during either the wake or the funeral? She goes, is your uncle being an asshole? I said, yeah. It's important to mention to you that he had glasses and he no longer has glasses anymore. Does that make sense to you? Your grandfather feels like he was very clear in the will. Your grandfather says he did a good job, that if it wasn't for the doctor, he would have passed away probably about 6 months prior. She goes, now, I want to talk about your brother for a second. She goes, is he look exactly like you? And I go, to an extent. And now, of course, naturally, it's something else a skeptic would come across and go,
brothers,
of
obviously.
course they look alike.
Yeah.
Because I kind of look like this guy.
Yeah,
Shared genes. That's bound to happen.
So she goes, I want to talk about where he's buried. And to me, this part is the most important thing, because to me, it verified that this was him on the other end. She says, now, where he is very tranquil. It's kind of peaceful. I go, well, he's next to a brook. She goes, now, where is he buried? And I go, Englewood. She goes, where is Englewood? Now, before I get into this is, once again, something a skeptic would claw at. They would go, she should know that it was Englewood or whatever.
Right.
It's not like that. You have to help a little. They give you a crumb, and you have to take it and run with it. They can't sit there and go, the purple sweater next to the cat who has a black stripe on it. They're just going to tell you that there's a sweater in the room. It's maybe your grandmother's favorite color, and there's an animal in the room. They're not going to be able to be that accurate. So she goes, where's Englewood? And I said, I know you're not familiar with the area. I said, it's next to, and then she starts to laugh. And she goes, your grandfather's kind of teasing me. He's going, you don't know where Englewood is? Which is verbatim, exactly what he would say at that moment, with that kind of deadpan type of sarcastic humor. And what he was saying was as if Englewood is prominent when it's not, but he knows it's not prominent.
Right,
exactly. So he's making fun of it in a way.
So that's the type of subtle thing that, she would never, even if she researched all this stuff and found his death certificate,
exactly what
she would never get his verbiage, his sense of humor.
That's exactly what he would have said. And it's unique. It's his form of unique humor that no one else would be able to pick up on. I can actually hear him saying that.
Right.
She goes, why do I feel like he's in two places? And I go, well, I don't know. I said, I said, maybe his house, and he's in a different dimension. And of course, at this point now, I'm trying to kind of cheat a little and prod her to figure out what is the afterlife? What is that? And she doesn't go there. She goes, I feel like he's in two places. She goes, I feel like he's around the house. She goes, but I also feel like he's in another place, and it's by a canal. She's calling it, she goes, I'm like a moat? And she goes, oh yeah, like a moat, a canal. It's away from the house, but not really. And I got to tell you, I said, I can't figure out what that is. Later, I would find out that is his shore house that he had, that was located in Toms River, New Jersey. And that was someplace that he sold kind of under duress. He didn't want to sell it. He sold it based on the fact that my grandmother was kind of pushing him to.
So he always regretted it.
Right. So that's someplace he would return.
That's his happy place.
That's exactly it. And that's somewhere he would return if he had the capability to. And so what's interesting about that is if you want to run with that, is that he's able to get back and forth in some form. So whether that be teleportation, I don't know what that, or some other means.
Right.
He's able to be one place and then 170 miles away. At what point, whether it's in the morning and then in the afternoon, I don't know. But he's able to travel certainly more expeditiously and efficiently and definitely more frequently than somebody like us would be able to. She goes, now, he also, he left you almost like a tie tack. She goes, does that make any sense? She goes, are there coins near you? And what's interesting about that is that I had he was part of a organization called the Lions Club. So he had these pins, Lions Club pins, and the emblem. They're all the emblem is circular. And so she was seeing that
as coins.
And I don't know what, truth be told, what a tie tack is.
I don't know either.
I know them as pins.
Right.
So I said, tie tack, he did not leave me tie tacks. No. So later on in the call, she actually mentions that she goes, have you been wearing his ties to work? And I said, I have. And she goes, okay. She goes, he likes that you wear his ties. And she goes, what's with the tie tack? And I go, tie tack. She goes, and then she brought up the coins again. She goes, do you have those near you? And I go, I have pins near me. She goes, oh, yeah. She goes, that's my term for a tie tack.
Ah.
And I think that's important to know too, is that a lot of times.
So it could just be she might not be wrong.
Right.
It's just a miscommunication.
Absolutely. That's, I think, people don't always solve the communication gap. And sometimes they read the communication gap as somebody's lack of accuracy when it really is just, you say forest, I say forest.
Right.
And so that really, and it's important to nail.
That's just a human.
It's just a human miscommunication. It's important to nail that down. So she says, now this is important. She says, now I'm getting another person like a gene. She goes, let's summarize. She goes, we know we have your father, your grandfather, and your grandfather's father. She goes, now the fourth person. She goes, I have like a gene. And I said, right. I go, okay. I said, a gene. I said, I got to tell you, I said, I know who you're talking about. And that person and I have nothing to do with each other. And she goes, well, how so? And I go, well, that was a niece of my grandmother's who lived in Florida and committed suicide. And she I think she was under the influence of something. I think it was either alcohol or something to that effect. She goes, okay, well, she's over there. Now, if you want to take that and run with it, then you can say, well, the question of if somebody commits suicide, do they go to the afterworld? Is there some type of punishment? That is here not the case.
Right.
She had made it to the other side.
She's reunited now with the
yeah,
family.
So she's where they are. And so I think now we were talking earlier about, well, what happens if somebody who's distant from you comes through and it's not who you wanted? I think sometimes when that does happen, like an Uncle Clarence who's not anybody that you're very close with comes through, it might be their way of going, this is my only opportunity
right
to get to my immediate family. And it might be through this distant cousin of mine who I don't really talk to.
So they're kind of jumping on the coattails.
They're jumping on the coattails and they're hoping that you're going to take that and go somewhere with it.
Right. So you've now become the vehicle for them to jump on your...
Right. It's a vehicle to a vehicle.
Right. You're going to deliver that message for them. Right. They've jumped in with your grandfather.
And now it's become a telephone game in the sense that they're using the immediate family member's contact with the psychic who's talking to the family member here on Earth, who's then hopefully going to go to their immediate family. Right. So it's they're hoping for a lot, but I guess they're desperate in a sense to get a message. Maybe not desperate, but maybe wanting. So so that was really interesting to me, and I was surprised that she was able to nail that type of person coming through. But she said to me at one point, she goes, I feel like you're also sitting at like a desk. She goes in like, it's like a corner office. And I go, that's true. I go, I'm sitting right at this desk, and it's my grandfather's desk, and his office where he's, the room I'm sitting in is looking out the back and looking out the side of the house. So I didn't say to her, and I probably should have, can you see me? Is somebody telling you? And that's definitely something that's ambiguous. Is somebody, right, or a question that should be asked, or something to ponder. Is somebody saying to her, this is where he's sitting? Is she seeing me sitting there? I don't know. Or is she just seeing a desk and an office without me seeing there? Just there's many scenarios.
Right.
So, it's also important to mention that we now have 4 people who are trying to get through to her. And I feel like at this point, the other 3, my father, the cousin, and my great-grandfather, know at this point that I'm on this call to get hold of my grandfather. So I feel like they're letting him talk, and they're letting me just work with him.
Right.
This is probably why he's on the phone call. And we need to ensure that we give them, we're on the clock. We know he's on the clock, and we need to give him the time he needs, because they didn't come through much.
Right.
So I think you will experience that when you go to these readings, that you might have somebody that will just pop in on the call for a second. They might still be there for the whole entirety of the phone call, but they're letting somebody else take a front seat.
And part of that could be just them just acknowledging their presence, just saying like, hey, I'm here, I'm watching out for you, whatever.
Right.
And then they respectfully step back. So
they
it's just sort of giving you a nod and letting you know that they're there, they're safe on the other side.
So my sense of this call was I got a lot of closure to it. I got a lot of closure from knowing that my grandfather was where he was, knowing that he was okay. And I didn't have closure because I didn't have closure to his death because there was no type of, he's been sick for a week, had a chance to talk to him, he's dying of this. It was just woke up, went back to sleep, passed, no idea what happened. So that's a lot of question marks that were turned essentially into periods.
So unlike your first call where you said you hung up and felt sort of melancholy, disappointed, this time
I felt like this is what's got to go down now.
And you got all that.
I got closure. I feel like a lot of calls or a lot of readings will either open up doors, whether that's good or bad, and a lot of calls and readings will close doors, whether that be good or bad. In this particular instance, it closed doors, and it was a good thing.
So now you have one upcoming reading already on the books.
I do.
Who is that with?
So that's with this Conchetta Bertoli, the one who does the shows.
Who you went to 2 of her shows.
Right. And what's interesting about this is that I had actually called her secretary and said, I want to do a private reading. This woman is booked into 2022.
Wow.
She has private readings booked 7 years.
That's crazy.
In advance. But I had mentioned that I had been to a couple of readings. So I established some type of relationship there, some type of loyalty program, if you will. And she also mentioned that she just had, prior to me calling, a cancellation for some random time on a random Wednesday. And she goes, it's probably not going to be a very popular time, but can you do this? And I said, yes.
And it's on the phone?
It's not on the phone. It's in person.
And how long is that one scheduled to
Now, that is a quick one. That's 25 minutes, which can either feel like eternity,
right,
or it could go probably like a blink.
And as you said, if they come out of the gate hot, that could be more than enough time.
What I've learned here, though, is, and how I plan on going into it, is because of those time constraints, because I don't have the leisure of an hour or 45 minutes, and it's a quick 25 minutes. Unlike previously where I was saying a lot and commenting a lot and no, this is not how then providing a lot of backstory and detail, I really feel like I'm just going to go into it, sit down and just let her do the talking.
Right.
And where I'm asked a question, it will be quick and concise.
Short and sweet.
Short,
Get the
sweet,
most bang for your buck.
most bang for your buck, and most out of it. Because if I go on too long and expand too long,
You're wasting
you're
your own
wasting
time.
my own time. And that's the best thing to do. So that's actually coming up in about a week and a half.
Well, we definitely would like to have you back on
Yes.
after that just
Yes.
to do a follow-up. I will say one thing before we let you go here. One thing I noticed that's very interesting that seems to be a kind of a theme in this is whenever you're searching for a medium, it'll sort of fall into your lap, as you said the first time with your mother running into a friend who just said, "Oh, I know this name," and that worked. You hear about a book signing, look it up, and she's got a local show.
Right.
You call her, and 7 years is the usual wait, and you kind of slide into one.
Right. Well, it's also interesting that you mentioned that because I was so frustrated not able to get a hold of this phone reader, this Cindy Lane Newcomb, when my grandfather passed. And it took me a good 2 months to get a hold of her, to get a hold of him. And a friend of mine who knew about this frustration said, maybe this is happening for a reason. And it might not be a celestial reason, but maybe there's just a good reason, just a beneficial reason that you're waiting. This is taking as long as it is.
Right.
And it was important that it was about 2.5 months after he passed that I got a reading to speak to him, because now he had more to comment on. Whereas if I had gotten a hold of him a week after he passed, it would have just been him commenting on the funeral, and that would have been it.
Right.
But he was able to comment on things that had really transpired before then. And so I'm hoping he'll come through, and now, another 3 or 4 months has passed, so he'll be able to basically expound on this. And, also the other thing is that, looking into this next reading, I know that there's other things that I would like him to, or any relative to, press upon. But we don't know if after the call ends or the show ends, that they on the other side go, "Damn it, I wish I'd mentioned this." Or, "Oh, I didn't bring that up." Or, "You know what, next time if he ever comes back, I'll bring this up." And that's maybe what's going on over there.
Right.
Maybe he's saying, "Oh, I hope he comes back." And
so, in closing here, it's safe to say you definitely do believe in mediums, their abilities.
yes.
What are your thoughts personally on the afterlife? Like, knowing now and having the confidence that you've spoken to people that have passed on, are you afraid of death? Are you not? Does heaven exist? Does hell? What are your personal beliefs?
It's a great question. I definitely know an afterlife exists, for sure.
100%.
100%. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but I do know that it's got a lot more freedoms. It's definitely more. It's less restrained. I feel like they have more abilities. I feel though also like while they will be healed, if somebody has an ailment here, whether it be mental or physical, while they are healed over there, I feel like their personality doesn't change. I feel like the personality really remains the same. And when you do eventually meet up with them again, I feel like it's going to be the same personality. I think that what really stuck out in my mind was that one group of teenagers who came across their friend had passed by shooting. And I feel like when that Conchetta Bertolli said, "There's justice on this end," I feel that that's a very important element. I feel like when you do get there, I think there's a lot of retrospective, and I feel like you'll probably realize, "Oh man, I wronged this person, I wronged that person, I should have apologized to that person." Now, I've heard a lot of theories about a life review where you get over there and somebody shows you almost like a hologram, if you will, of you wronging this person or you wronging that person, and them trying to point out to you where you did somebody dirty.
Right.
And the reason for that is to not only, in a sense, provide you with a lesson, but also, in a sense, to punish you, if you will, and bring to the forefront how you screwed up. And I don't know if there's a hell. I've never gotten any type of thought on that. There's been theories that this is hell, which is interesting.
That's true.
But I do know an afterlife exists. I think there is some type of evolution of a person when they get there. I think the personality remains the same, but I also think there's a review. And I think the person gets there and really kind of has a moment. I think the best way I can equate it in summarizing, I think, is you climb the hill, you climb the mountain, and then you get on top of the mountain and you look down. And I think that when you pass, I think you get to wherever afterlife is. And I think you kind of look back down and you look at now. And I also think too, not only do you look at your life, but now you have access to basically spying on people. I think now you have access to, almost like an invisibility cloak, if you will, if that's the best way to describe it. And I think it'll provide you up there some type of insight where you go, I don't know why this person was acting like this to me. Here you'll go, why is this person acting so mean to me? Why is this person treating me like this? Why are they always so abrasive? I think once you pass on and you have the power to kind of walk around with an invisibility cloak, you'll have an opportunity to kind of spy into their life, and you'll go, oh my God, they're going through a bad divorce. That's why.
So you'll gain some sort of understanding.
It's interesting. You almost become more human
in a way
on the other side.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. That's a very, very good way to put it. I think, and in closing, you asked me what my viewpoint is, and I think this is maybe one of my favorite philosophical thoughts. And I think there's some credibility to it. And it's mind-boggling to me because there is no right or wrong answer. I believe it was Plato who first came up with this theory, and I've heard it since from other people, that they're alive and we are dead here. And there's no proof one way or another. And your birth here, that they would refer to it as here on Earth, could be your death. Because if you think about it, in a circle form, you can view heaven as the top. You can view heaven as the 12 o'clock. And then you wind back up at the 12 o'clock at some point. And if you want to go in a counterclockwise motion, you can view it as, all right, at 11 o'clock, at 11 o'clock is you at the hospital, emerging, and we call it here birth, but it might be death in a sense because you're leaving the afterworld, you're leaving the 12 o'clock. And who knows, they might refer to it here, we refer to it here as, oh, your grandfather passed away, that's awful, I'm so sorry to hear that. But they might view it there as, you were born. Or they might refer to us as, oh, your grandson is still dead and we're waiting for him to be reborn again. And their reborn might be us, what we view here as dying. So, when the ventilator is shut off here, they might be viewing that as, oh, he's being born. And when we emerge from, our mother here, they might view that as, that's his death. So it's a very interesting way to look at it, that this is death and then that's life.
From what it sounds like, that is truly living.
As the coffin goes into the ground, the baby emerges on the other side.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's exactly it.
Poetry.
It's a good analogy.
So that's Bert. That's his whole story. That's the third part of our interview with him. Really long, in-depth interview. We want to thank him for being a great guest. He was really honest, really open, and he taught us a lot of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting experience and a very interesting insight into the experience and the emotions and all that are associated with it.
Yeah, definitely. And as we even said before, we had no experience with it, with mediums. We were very suspicious of the whole thing. So for him to give not only his firsthand account of it all, but a lot of useful tips and advice for our listeners out there that are going to go seek a medium. He brought a lot to the table, and it was, I think it was a very interesting show. And I will say very easily, we haven't been on that long, but he's definitely our most sort of controversial guest, as we've gotten a lot of emails, tweets, texts, chats with friends from people that kind of run the spectrum from people that really loved everything he said, loved all his advice. They're really thankful. They told me, like, I was trying to figure out how to find a medium, and he gave me these tips that I used. And one woman even said she reached out to Cindy Lane Newcomb already and has spoken with her, and it was amazing. Then you get those people, that kind of are on the fence. Some of what he said was interesting. Some of it was a little suspicious. And then, of course, on the far end, we get people that are like, this guy is being taken for a hoax. He says that he's smarter than this and that, but, all mediums are fake, and they're just sort of using his grief against him.
Right.
So it's very interesting how, I guess, like, somewhat polarizing it could be. I guess that'll probably be true with a lot of the subject matter on this show, as part of the fun of it is that it is up for debate. But I thought that was interesting, and just how different people reacted differently to his story.
Yeah, and even he brings that up a little bit, where he says during the last interview there, he points out certain parts in his story where he says, now I know a skeptic would have a field day with this,
right?
But to me personally, it has this type of meaning. So that it becomes like this interesting gray area where, yeah, you're an outsider and you're hearing it from this perspective. And if you do like a black and white equation, that doesn't add up. But for him to be emotionally involved and wrapped up in the situation, it has a much different meaning.
For sure. And that's even people have told me, like, they enjoy that. At some parts he would say, like, that's fraud, or don't listen to this medium. Or she was selling me the Hallmark feel good, warm and fuzzies, and I wasn't buying it. So he does, say at points like, yeah, this was BS and I recognized it. But then other people say, like, well, we couldn't actually hear the conversation he had with the medium, so maybe they didn't say it exactly like that. Maybe he's remembering it differently, or certain points they'd say, he read too much into it.
Right.
So do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, and then like other people said things about how in the first interview, he said he didn't want to say too much, but then he ended up giving her some information anyway. And then when he went to the group reading, I heard like a comment like, how anonymous is it really if you plant yourself in the crowd with a bright green shirt and all that kind of stuff? Like,
that's true.
So
and he chatted with her beforehand as well, so she
right.
recognized him.
Yeah, but yeah, it still gives you that feeling, which is something I've spoken about before. About I mean, you want to give our final thoughts on how we feel about mediums on the other side of this interview now? Because when we started, we kind of gave our opinions.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we talked about some of the listener opinions that were shared with us, but at the end of the day, it's our show. We are the Brothers Mysterium, so I think we should definitely kind of give our kind of recap thoughts on it.
Like I said, like I definitely got a feeling like, wow, this is weird and this is interesting, and how could a lot of this stuff be known? But I think I'm still. I think I'm not sold on the whole medium thing, I got to say, especially because throughout the process of doing these interviews, I was reading a book about Harry Houdini, and it talked a lot about his medium shows and how he used to go to towns and gather information and would pay people off to tell him secrets about people in the town. And then he would do these public performances and just like throw all the information out there. And people were amazed, and people were absolutely convinced that this was coming to him from spirits from the beyond. And sometimes when someone reveals a trick like that, suddenly you can see how like easy it is to pull off. And if Harry Houdini was doing that kind of stuff, back in the early 1900s, we live in the age of information now. I think people could much more easily get their hands on people's information and then kind of spin it back to you. So I don't think I'm a medium believer yet.
Now, you just kind of touched on something that was shared in my thoughts, which is, like I said, I was sort of on the fence at first because I feel like a lot of it can be staged. You can look stuff up, but then there are those aha moments that I've only seen on TV, obviously. But when it's like somebody's nickname, a secret memory, a little, a birthday gift, something that nobody would know, always had me like that part of me going like, could this be real? So listening to this story, I sort of broke it down, and like there's a lot of stuff like birth dates, names of people, which to me is not at all impressive if a medium gets that right. Because number one, if I died and I could come back and speak to loved ones, I would not say generic biographical information, I wouldn't be like, tell
Right.
him my birthday, tell him my brother's birthday. Another thing, like you said, the age of information, the internet, you can do anything. So like when he sent a letter to her with the payment and no photos because he didn't send them, she could very easily have hopped on like Google Maps, or I was thinking even a lot of the lead up to this is like, oh, it takes 6 months to see this lady. There's a 9-month waiting list. That's a lot of time to do some research on somebody if you have an assistant or a team doing that who can go on Google Maps, look up your address and say, oh, you live by a body of water.
Right, which was from the first episode. She
Right.
brought that up. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, even Facebook, if people have privacy settings and stuff, you could still see what school they go to. It's not hard to say to any college or high school kid, like, you have a class you don't like. There's a teacher you don't agree with, because that's almost always going to be the case.
From what I've observed with mediums, it seems like they always use similar tactics and always touch upon the same subjects. Like you were saying, like birth dates. Like they always go with birth dates, and then it's always things like the will, the family's not getting along, things like that. But at the same time, now if you want to spin it the other way and say, because Bert did talk a lot about how a medium has to translate the information that's coming from the other side. I don't know how that would work out, or if these are just the things that come through. But yeah, I agree with what you said. Like if I were dead, not that I've been dead, so I can't really say what I would be able to do or what I wouldn't be able to do. But I think I would definitely try and pass on significant messages and not just like kind of describe myself how I was. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. It's like you don't care. Like, was he tall? Did he pass away from it's like, I would either, just me personally, I would either do something funny or just my personality would come through, or I would just kind of leave a message, and I would definitely do something to prove without a shadow of a doubt that it was me. I wouldn't list off my height and my eye color. It's like a driver's license, basically, at points.
Well, a thought I had just now that goes along the lines of the whole not really knowing how it works kind of thing is like, maybe the descriptive element is necessary because she kind of has like a crowd of dead people around her, if you will, and she needs to kind of discern who she is meant to be reaching out to. I don't know. But it did seem to me like they were always able to easily hone in on who they were supposed to be contacting. Like as soon as they start talking to Bert, they're always like, it's your father, right? Conchetta Bertoli said, someone like a father, and Cindy Lane Newcomb said, your father, Anthony, and she knew right away. So maybe not. I don't know.
But on the flip side to that too, while I was thinking of all these things, I could have been like, even Facebook, they talk about the facial hair, the way you dress, whatever. There were certain things that probably one of the biggest moments where people were polarized on. I had some people telling me they got chills. They started tearing up when it's mentioned that his first conversation on the phone with Cindy Lane Newcomb, and she says, your father said not to cry, and he's standing next to you on the front lawn. People were like, had chills. Like I said, they were couldn't believe it. They were blown away. And other people were like, well, maybe she heard a car in the background drive by, and at that point, if she's already Google mapped his house, it's obviously the front yard, and maybe she knew and stuff like that. And I guess there are going to be naysayers who could always come up with excuses as to how this was done. But then there are other examples, and I'll touch on a few of them that were really interesting. One is in that first conversation, the first full phone conversation, she says, like, your father's in the backyard pointing to the neighbors, and, he doesn't get along with them. And Bert says, like, oh, yeah, that's kind of an old rivalry. It's not, whatever. We don't even deal with them anymore, but there was a time things were really bad. And like that's something where it's like you're not going to Google it and it's going to say like he hates his neighbors.
Yeah, unless there was some kind of official, like there was like a lawsuit over like a property boundary or something like that. Like unless there was some kind of official documentation.
Right.
I mean, obviously his neighbors weren't going and writing about like, goddamn, I hate my neighbors who I fought with 10 years ago on Facebook and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's definitely not an easy thing to dig up. But I guess I don't know. I got to always play devil's advocate. Again, like property disputes among neighbors are a pretty common thing.
That's true. And like, it wasn't as specific as like pointing to the White House that's on the right side of your fence.
Right. Like I currently right now have 3 neighbors around me and I could choose which one I thought I didn't get along with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. They sort of set the table and then let you finish it off. 2 other things quick that kind of caught my attention was one was like all of the discussion about cars. Like, who drives a BMW? Were you looking at a Mercedes recently? When Bert was learning to drive, his dad was with him. Right now, do you own a sporty car? And Bert's like, well, it's a Honda with a spoiler. And it's really interesting because, like, I knew Bert's father, and he was definitely a big car guy, was really into cars. So much car-centric discussion is something that, again, it's like there's not a list of his hobbies somewhere that, you can Google and find.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of those moments where I'm like, now how would, she have come across that? And another one that I find very interesting was at the group reading when the one-legged man comes into the picture.
Right.
And Bert has no idea who it is, never heard of him, and then finds out from his mom that it was actually a cousin of his father who's more like a brother who in Vietnam lost a leg. Bert didn't know it. So it's not like he definitely did not lead her to that,
Right,
even
exactly.
without knowing it or, subconsciously.
And also, with that, it's interesting because, like we were saying, with like the phone call in Cindy Lane Newcomb, and there were months before it where she could have done research. In this situation, he walked in there and was called on. This lady, Conchetta Bertoli, had no time to do background checks on any of these people.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I guess you could say when you bought a ticket online or something, maybe she could have, but it's like at that point, what does she like? She doesn't match faces. Like at that point, you have to be a real skeptic to think that she went through and had all that background info done on everybody for every show, and that's a little.
My fiance Amy had a good point though, in that she can do research on a handful of people in the crowd, and since everyone volunteers, like Bert said, she can then zoom in and choose those people whom she did prior research on.
Right. So I guess in the end, I'd say that I'm still on the fence. It's really interesting too, because at certain points, what he was saying when we're in the conversation, I'm like swaying back and forth the whole time, where I'm like, wow, that's really impressive. Maybe this is real. This has got to be real. And then I'll kind of, fade back off and go, well, I don't know. This doesn't seem that real. So I guess maybe I slightly believe more in the potential for it than I did before our conversation with Bert.
Right.
So I guess this kind of leaves the question, which we discussed a little bit off the air. We should definitely get into it now, of are mediums these frauds that are kind of cashing in on the sympathy and grief of people who are distraught over losing someone close to them? Because Bert even said, when I mentioned that, hey, we might just go to a medium and check it out, see what it's like, just for the fun of it, to test it. And he said, most people go because they need answers, they need closure, they miss someone very dearly. So are mediums taking advantage of that and these people in this kind of weakened state just to make money? Or are these mediums for real? Are their abilities real? In which case they're doing good. They're providing a sort of a beautiful service in that they're allowing people to commune with their loved ones that have passed away. And they're allowing those that are deceased to sort of relay back to those still here that they're okay, they're doing fine. There is something on the other side. And Bert clearly believes that he has spoken with his father, with his grandfather, even his great-grandfather. And he's certain that when his life on this plane ends, there's another world for him where there's justice, where he'll be reunited with all those people that he's lost, which, if true, is really a mind-blowing concept.
Right. No matter which side of the fence you fall on, whether you're a believer or you're not a believer, it still has a heavy weight to it. Because if you are a believer, then that means there's this insight into the afterlife and a whole world beyond what we know, which pries open infinite discussion and possibilities. But if you are not a believer and it's not true, then it begs the moral question, which is, how sinister are these people really? Like, just the thought of like someone almost like using your dead relative as a puppet. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Like, it's kind of a sick thought when you think about it like that. It's, this person this person is putting words in the mouth of your deceased loved one. So either side of the fence, believer or non-believer, it's a heavy outcome, I say.
Indeed. And the repercussions of if this could be true or not, as you said, is kind of earth-shattering to your view of what is reality, what is possible. And we will definitely continue to explore more in upcoming episodes, delving into mediums, interviewing mediums, hopefully seeing a medium ourselves. We're going to do whatever we can to figure out as best we can what is the truth.
On the next episode of the Brothers Mysterium.
We are currently driving through Clifton, West Virginia. We just crossed the Ohio River from Ohio into West Virginia, and we are minutes away from Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
They got down to the bottom of the steps here and they started screaming. We heard this terrible boom, and my boys looked around and saw the bridge starting to fall.
There's a lot of moving parts here, so basically it's the Mothman.
So we would see the men in black stand along the street there by the hotel stuff, and they would just be standing there like this, you know. At them days, you didn't bother the government. You didn't talk to them or ask them what they were doing.
Once you sort of come to the conclusion that, like, you deeply feel like these people are being honest and telling the truth, they're saying exactly what they think happened, there are only really 3 places you can go with that.
As always, a big thanks to Dan and Gwen Hudson for their voiceover work. Also, a shout out to The Nevergrin for helping us out with the music, including our theme song. Check them out at thenevergrin.com. We also want to thank Bert for sharing his story with us. He'll be back on the show down the road with a follow-up on his latest medium reading, so be on the lookout for that. And also, a big thanks to all of you who are listening. If you want to share your opinion on Bert's story, or anything else we've discussed, or if you have a paranormal or unexplained story that you want to share, topics you want us to discuss, anything cool you want to share in general, or maybe you want to tell us how much you like the show, or how crappy you think it is, feel free to do so. We love to hear from you guys. You can hit us up at Gmail, thebrothersmysterium@gmail.com, on Twitter @Mysterium Bros. If you go to YouTube, just search The Brothers Mysterium. You'll find our official channel with no problems. All the episodes are on there, along with some other content. Or go to facebook.com/The Brothers Mysterium. That's our official Facebook page. Like I said, we love hearing from you guys. We look forward to receiving all your feedback. And thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.